everyone, Jolene here from Bookworm Adventure Girl. I hope that you are doing well. Today I will be talking about Margaret Atwood's first published novel, The Edible Woman. I can't believe we're already on the 4th episode in the Mondays with Margaret series. Today we'll complete the first month of the series already. Welcome back to those who are following along, and if you are new here, thanks for checking out my channel. If you are interested in following this series, or if you are interested in diverse reading and Canadian literature, then please hit subscribe and stick around. At the end, I will let you know what you can expect in the next few episodes of the series. So Margaret Atwood wrote The Edible Woman in 1965, but it didn't get published until 1969 because the publisher had misplaced the manuscript. So this would be her debut novel, and it would be her introduction of prose to the world, as all of her other published works had been poetry up until this point. The Edible Woman is a novel I read over 20 years ago, and although I remembered liking it, I couldn't have told you much about it. I knew that there was symbolic cannibalism, but that was about it. So I'm not going to give away any spoilers in today's video. I'm going to talk about the writing, the characters, and a few of the themes, but I won't give too much away. The book is divided into 3 parts. The first and last part are written in first person. The second part is written in third person. And I think that Atwood does this to show how the main character kind of loses herself and then finds herself again. And I love how Atwood uses food and eating images throughout the entire book, and even the word cannibalism is used several times. One of my favorite quotes was on page 98 in my edition, and this is Duncan talking to Marion. He says, "I bring out the Florence Nightingale in them, but be careful." He was looking at me now, cunningly, sideways. "You might do something destructive. Hunger is more basic than love. Florence Nightingale was a cannibal, you know." When I was reading some of the reviews, some of them said that this was funny and witty, and I hadn't remembered that. I thought that the book was much more serious. But on this read, yes, there are several funny moments, and especially when it comes to toilet training and the woman who lives down below. So this leads to the characters. So the main character is Marion McAlpin. She works at Seymour Surveys, which is a marketing research company. And then the people that surround Marion are her roommate Ainsley, who works for an electric toothbrush company, and her friends Clara, who is married to Joe, and they have 2 children, and at the beginning Clara is like 7 months pregnant. Marion is dating a man named Peter, and there are 3 co-workers that are collectively referred to as the office virgins. There's also the woman below, who is the owner of the house where Marion and Ainsley live. They are on the top floor, and the owner lives below them. There's also Duncan, who Marion meets when she is doing her surveys, and Duncan has 2 roommates. And then finally there is Len, who is a notorious womanizer and a former university friend of Clara and Marion's. So through this cast of characters, there are many themes that I think Atwood is trying to cover in the novel. And I chose 7 to talk about, but I'm sure there's many more that could be found as well. So first, I think that society's ideals is a big one. And I think she shows this through all of the characters at some point, but especially with the woman below and the expectations and judgments that she has of Marion and Ainsley. She's constantly watching who is coming and going from their place, and she makes a point to let them know if she approves or not. And then another big theme, I think, is gender roles, and specifically in the workplace. Marion makes a point of saying that the men work upstairs and the women work on her floor. So there's segregation in her workplace of the roles for men and women. And Marion's boss at one point early on tells her that Mrs. Dodge will have to be removed. She's pregnant. So it says here on page 17 in my edition, "I'm afraid Mrs. Dodge and Kamloops will have to be removed. She's pregnant. Mrs. Bogue frowns slightly. She regards pregnancy as an act of disloyalty to the company. So there's disloyalty to the company, and there's, once women are married, there's not, it's almost an expectation that they not work anymore. And even for Peter, there are expectations, but for him it was very different. And I think it's on page 86 in my edition that you'll see a difference. Peter says, and now things are settled. This is after he and Marion are engaged. He says, and now things are settled. I feel I'm going to be much happier. A fellow can't keep running around indefinitely. It'll be a lot better in the long run for my practice, too. The clients like to know you've got a wife. People get suspicious of a single man after a certain age. They start thinking you're a queer or something. So there's some expectations for him, too, but it's very different than what it is for women. It's almost like this is a better thing for him than it is for Marion. When it comes to the role of women in parenting, on page 35, we hear what Ainsley thinks. Ainsley thinks that, every woman should have at least one baby because it fulfills her femininity. And she doesn't want to get married, but she wants to get pregnant. So her and Marion go and visit Clara and Joe, who have children, and one on the way. And Ainsley makes a judgment on their marriage and their parenting. Ainsley thinks that Joe does way too much for Clara, and that if he wasn't around, things would be better. And on page 34, it says, she is Clara. Clara would have to cope by herself, and she would cope, and their total upbringing would be much more consistent. The thing that ruins families these days is the husbands. Have you noticed she isn't even breastfeeding the baby? So she's, judging them on not only their marriage, but also on their parenting. And after Peter and Marion get engaged, there's not really joy for them. Ainsley kind of looks at it as, the positive part is that it'll be easy for her to get out of it. And I think she actually tells them to go to the States to get married. She says, well, if I were you, I'd get married in the States. It'll be so much easier to get a divorce when you need one. I mean, you don't really know him, do you? So she sees it as something that, she thinks that this is a good thing. And then she also says that, Peter will soon be making enough money so you can live separately when you have a baby, even if you don't get a divorce. But I hope you aren't getting married right away. I don't think you know what you're doing. So, here's someone who she lives with, that she's just told that she's getting married, and she's not really, celebrating with her so much. When she tells Clara, her other friend, Clara is happy for her, but even her response isn't something that Marion necessarily wants to hear. She gets a little upset with her. Clara sounded pleased, but her response was ambiguous. Oh, good, she said. Joe will be delighted. He's been saying lately that it's about time you settled down. I was slightly irritated. This is Marion speaking, or thinking. After all, I wasn't 35 and desperate. So her thought was, she still has time. She doesn't have to settle down right away. And they're making judgments on her engagement. So there were some interesting things that every time she told someone, it wasn't necessarily something that she wanted to hear. So society's ideals are a big theme in this book, and, especially around parenting and marriage. And we do eventually hear what Marion thought of her own engagement. And on page 100, she says, the decision was a little sudden, but now I've had time to think about it. I realize it is actually a very good step to take. Of course, I'd always assumed through high school and college that I was going to marry someone eventually and have children. Everyone does. Either two or four. 3 is a bad number, and I don't approve of only children. They get spoiled too easily. I've never been silly about marriage the way Ainsley is. She's against it on principle, and life isn't run by principles, but by adjustments. So you can see the differences there in how society has certain expectations that, Marion has taken on. And the last theme that I want to talk about is consumerism. And it's set up very nicely the way that Marion works for, a marketing company, and that Ainsley works for these defected electric toothbrushes that she has to try out. But there's a couple of, I just have 2 quotes that I want to share that talk about this consumerism and the idea of how This is one of the ways that society tells you what you need and what to buy and how it's going to change your life. So on page 116, Marion is, basically judging a man who is on, I think they're on a bus, and it says, perhaps his otherwise normal mind had been crazed into frenzy by the girdle advertisements on the buses. He was a victim of society. Society flaunted these slender, laughing, rubberized women before his eyes, practically forcing upon him their flexible blandishments, and then refused to supply him with any. He had found when he had tried to buy the garment in question at store counters that it came empty of the promised contents. But instead of raging and fuming and getting nowhere, he had borne his disappointment quietly and maturely, and had decided, like the sensible man he was, to go systematically in search of the underwear-clad image he so ardently desired, using for his purposes the handy telecommunications network provided by society. A just exchange. They owed it to him. So here he is, he sees these advertisements. He's not getting what he wants, so he's now searching for it. But of course, it doesn't actually exist, that this form, the women's form that they're showing, doesn't exist. And then the other one is on page 177. And again, it's Marianne, and she says, "You had to buy something sometime." She knew enough about it from the office to realize that the choice between, for instance, 2 brands of soap or 2 cans of tomato juice was not what could be called a rational one. In the products, the things themselves, there were no real difference. How did you choose then? You could only abandon yourself to the soothing music and make a random snatch. You let the thing in you that was supposed to respond to the labels just respond, whatever it was. Maybe it had something to do with the pituitary gland. Which detergent had the best power symbol? Which tomato juice can had the sexiest looking tomato on it? And did she care? Something in her must care. After all, she did choose eventually, doing precisely what some planner in a broad-loomed office had hoped and predicted she would do. She had caught herself lately watching herself with an abstracted curiosity to see what she would do. Finally, Marion's relationship with food is definitely a theme. I think when I read this the first time, I was thinking that there was something to do with eating disorders, and I think a case can still be made for that, but I love how Atwood does this. So in the beginning of the book, Marion is hungry. She talks about eating and getting something to eat since she's missed breakfast or she hasn't had breakfast. And after her engagement, Marion slowly has to stop eating certain foods. Throughout the story, words like hungry, ravenous, famished are used. Cutting and chewing the food is described. And when describing Marion, she uses words like translucent, invisible, as Marion slowly feels like she's being removed from reality. And of course, this is contrasted with Duncan's character, who I thought was just an odd duck. And he was very removed from reality, and Marion seems attracted to that. Overall, I really enjoyed this book. I think there's a lot of depth to it, and especially for a debut novel. I think it also shows, the themes and topics that Margaret Atwood has written about in her upcoming novels for us, but in her past novels. And the novel has a variety of characters, and I think we all know someone like these characters in the book. And I think it's written very well. And for over 30 years, after its publication, we can see that some things may have changed, but my guess is that most people could still relate to many of the themes that are in the book. So a reminder that the schedule for the series of what we are reading and when is in the description below. Next week I will go over what we are going to read during March, which has 5 Mondays. And next week we will be moving into the 70s with more poetry, and we will be talking a bit more about Margaret's friend Charles Patchter when we talk about the journals of Susanna Moodie. Please let me know if you've read The Edible Woman and what you thought of it. Who was your favorite character? Was there any themes that you noticed that I may not have talked about? I look forward to chatting with you in the comments below. I hope you have a great day, and don't forget to make every day an adventure.